Welcome to the Hustler's Guide to Flow. I'm your host, Marcia Miatke, and I'm taking you into the minds of some of the most incredible leaders in the medical, research, business, and yes, even spiritual fields to equip you with powerful insights and practical strategies to level up in business and in life. The next level version of yourself starts now. He's a former professional football player turned mindset consultant that specializes in emotional intelligence. He helps high performers connect to more joy and success by helping them heal the relationship they have with themselves. I'm so excited to share this conversation I had with the incredibly insightful Keyen Lage, where we talk about why women assume more masculine roles to achieve success in business, why that leads to burnout, and the impact it's having on their intimate relationships. Thanks so much, Keyen, for making the time to come on our show today.
Absolutely, Marcia. Thank you for having me.
Yay. So I really love your story, so definitely want to get into that. But before we get going, what is like a quote or a motto that you live by?
Ooh, that is a fantastic question. We're starting hot out of the gate.
We're going.
And that would be for me, the secret to life is meaningless unless you discover it yourself. I think too many people try to read a book and get the answers quick to living a life of true joy and enlightenment, but fail to realize that so much of it is learned through experience. And if you don't allow yourself the ability to experience things that your heart feels pulled to experience, then you may live your entire life wondering what if, or trying to force yourself into a certain way of being that doesn't feel completely right with you, even though it may provide you with the most happiness, but because you didn't give yourself permission to be able to go live life the way you wanted to at that time, you won't be able to fully appreciate that life that they say is the most joyous, if that makes sense. So go out and experience it yourself, no matter what it is, if you feel pulled to do it, and then you learn along the way.
Yeah, I love that. I actually heard something kind of along the lines of that where, because you're talking about the people are looking for meaning like externally, so you're reading your books and all that kind of stuff. And so it's almost like a cop-out sometimes to be like, I'm reading all these personal development books. There's a season for that where you need to be consuming. And then there's a time where you need to be on your own and finding what that message truly means to you rather than seeking another piece of knowledge and another piece of wisdom, like that wisdom is within you. So I love that. Okay, so tell us your backstory because it's so awesome and I want everybody to know it.
Yes, absolutely. So my story starts in the town of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Might be the only person that people here have heard of that is from South Dakota. There's not a lot of us, but Mount Rushmore is there. So that's our pride and joy. But I'm from South Dakota and I had the opportunity to play in the NFL. Very few people have the opportunity to do that from South Dakota. And I got all the way there, basically found out that I had a neck injury that was a lot worse than I thought. So when it came down to me signing my contract and passing the physical to be able to play on an MRI on my neck, they found that I had a condition that was much worse than the doctors initially thought. So once I got the MRI, I found out that my neck condition was too bad to where they said if I would have played, I was at a risk factor of 3.5 out of 4 to get paralyzed. So that quickly ended my potential to go to the NFL. Me, as somebody since I was in third grade saying I was going to make it to the NFL, a lot of my identity actually was wrapped up in the sport, and probably a little more than I'd like to admit. Because I consider myself very well-rounded at the time and didn't put all my eggs in one basket, I believe that I bypassed my attachment to the sport and tried to move on a little too quickly. But nevertheless, I went back home to South Dakota after I found out that I'd never be able to play again. Realized I wanted nothing to do with my degree I was going to be a financial analyst, and decided to go to the library and picked up book after book after book, and eventually picked up a book called The Biology of Belief by a guy named Bruce Lipton about a field of study called epigenetics. And this guy, Bruce Lipton, talked about being able to live a form of heaven on earth if you undid and unlearned who you became through your upbringing, right? So by unlearning who you were, you're able to attract and bring in exactly what it is that your soul and your higher self desires in life. So this book inspired me like, wow, I've never heard of anything like this before. And I want to get into a position where I can see if I can fully embody this. Let's give it a try. I made it to the NFL. Let's see if I can do this, right? So since then, I was a personal trainer. I then segued into moving to Miami and becoming an internal health specialist, where I've helped people with different autoimmune conditions and digestive disorders. Also other things like fibromyalgia and other chronic complex disease. Work through those things. I started off with just the nutritional side of it, and then later found that there was a much more than just nutritional deficiencies with these people, and dove into the mental emotional side of things. And I was like, all right, it's interesting how when I shift and change people's perceptions of their reality based off unlearning who they're not through dealing with unexpressed trauma, they were able to then get to a position where they're able to take care of themselves, but also release some of the stress and shame and guilt that they've developed throughout the years, which is causing their physical body to react. I'm like, wow, there's something to this. So I moved out of the nutritional space and more into the mental emotional space. I ended up meeting a lot of high performers similar to me, in regard to constantly pushing and trying to get to a level of success monetarily and just worldly and whatever they were working on, and found that there was a huge void similar to myself that many of them were trying to fill. And because at the age of 22, I was able to come to terms with the fact that nothing I ever did was going to provide me with the level of fulfillment that I was looking for, I'm now able to help many of these other men and women that are in that position as high performers to no longer find fulfillment in what they do, being able to detach from what they do, thus providing them to actually allow what it is they want in their life to come in without trying. And they're actually able to enjoy it when it does come. So that leads me to today. I took a little excursion for about a year and a half living in Colombia, South America, but now I'm back in the US.
Awesome. I really loved your story, and you kind of took us full circle because you were talking about how when that injury happened, you tried really hard to move on with your life. You're like, okay, I need to pivot. I'm not going to be a player anymore. I need to do something else. And you said you bypassed that attachment that you had to football. And I think that's really cool. And then you took that full circle through your journey of helping people with their nutrition, but then realizing, okay, it's not just the nutrition, it's actually their mental and emotional health. And then focusing on the high performers and their attachment to their role. And I see that a lot too. And the funny thing about attachment is most of us are not even aware of the attachment that we have. So that's really cool. I really loved your story. Let's talk about women, because I feel like actually I was reading something about research, and all of these things primarily and historically have been about men. And I feel like women are kind of clumped into the men file a lot in regards to high performance, in regards to everything. And so I thought, why don't we have a conversation that's specifically around women and specifically high performing women? Because obviously we are different, and the things that will make a man successful in the business world or at whatever we're doing, it's going to require a different recipe for women in regards to what we need to bring to the table, who we need to embody, who we need to be. So yeah, I thought that's what we could kind of like delve into.
Yes, I would love that.
Yay. Okay, so what do you see in regards to dealing with high performing women? What do you see is like their thing that's holding them back? Like, what is it, that thing that they're unaware of that's not allowing them to take either their performance to the next level or their fulfillment to even really be a key part of their life?
I think that's a phenomenal question, Marcia. And I'll make sure Marcia. So everybody out there listening, it's Marcia. All right, it's Marcia. It's not Marcia. All right.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, I'm going to put it out there. Absolutely. But I believe that so much of the success that some of these women get as far as monetarily and earthly, as far as success within business, comes from their ability to be able to master the very masculine tendency of pushing, making things happen at all costs, sacrificing a certain element of emotion to be able to achieve a certain goal. And I would say that gives them the ability to be able to push and get to a certain level of success that they attain. But to a certain point, and eventually, just like with men, it will be the downfall, right? Because the problem with constantly always using stress and pressure as a way to motivate yourself is that eventually when you do gain the success that you want in business, or you do make the money that you want, you're going to actually continue to push to get more and more of that stress to stay motivated to continue to gain more success. right? So most people think like, oh, when I make this certain amount of money or when I have a certain level of success, I'll stop pushing so hard, right? But it doesn't work like that, right? You get to that place and you're like, oh, you start twiddling your fingers, twiddling your thumbs. You're like, oh, okay, what's next? What's like, okay, I gotta do more. Okay, I gotta do more. I gotta do more. I gotta do more. And so you start doing more and you start creating more for yourself. And eventually what happens to a lot of people that I work with, women included, is that you put too much on your plate to where things start to fail around you and crumble around you. And you begin to not be able to pour into the things you need to pour into because you're trying to play catch up because of the place of stress that you feel like you need to operate under to be successful. Okay, so it doesn't stop. So, but like I said, I would say that that level of pressure they put on themselves gets them to that place of success, but ultimately will lead to their demise if not properly handled and managed. And so much of that is the ability to be able to suppress one's own emotions to attain a certain goal. And there is extreme downfall to that.
Yes. Oh, yes to everything you said. And I can totally relate to that, guys, because I was that person. I think there's an element of conditioning that we have this like belief that to be successful, especially in the business world, there is an element of leaving your emotions at the door. I certainly believe that when I first started working at corporate, and I really wanted to not show my feminine side, if that makes sense. Like I dressed a lot more corporate than I do now as a consultant. And I was trying to play the role like how my strategy officer was doing things as a 40-something-year-old German guy. And I was trying to embody that. And that is such a denial of who I am at my core. And it became exhausting. And I felt so alienated from who I truly was. And luckily for me, I was able to remove myself from that situation enough to realize that I was going down an unhealthy path. But I can totally relate to the sacrificing yourself so that you can move forward, that constantly pushing, that using that level of stress to take you to the next level. And I would agree that once you got to that next level, like when I got the promotion, it wasn't like I relaxed. It was like, okay, well, what do I now need to do to get to the next promotion? So it was a constant like chasing of your tail. It was like a really dysfunctional loop of like habitual patterns and thought processes. So then what do we do then? As women who want to be successful, we want to make impact. How do we thrive in, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say in a man's world.
I think the first thing I want to say is I really can't imagine being a woman in many of these more corporate settings. I know that men in those settings, I've heard just terrible things. So I can't even begin to relate to women go through in those positions. I can see why they would feel like they have to fully embody that masculine to the fullest, past the point what might feel comfortable, because if they don't, then guys are ruthless. And it's true. So I've seen it firsthand, and I can't even begin to relate to that. So kudos to many of the women that are able to do it, because the odds against them, I think, are much more difficult just based off the environment. So I would like to acknowledge that. So I can't fault the women that believe they need to do that to get to where they want to be, because to a certain extent, if you allow yourself to be vulnerable in those settings, then it's very difficult to not allow those ways of being that men might project onto you to bother you. So I can see why you and other women would embody that. But I would agree that those ways of being were more an attraction of where you currently were at. And it comes down to, I think, the foundation of all of it to help people understand a little more, because I think one of the biggest things that prevents women and men from being able to detach from that constantly pushing, operating under that high amounts of stress to be able to move forward and get what you want, is that they think it's who they are. They're like, oh, this is who I am. I'm just type A. I'm just always push. It's just who I am. Right. But I would argue in many of the people that embody that high performing way of being, women included, that never had the opportunity to be able to depend on somebody when they were younger. So this high performing push way of being starts very, very young most of the time. And it starts in a position where they had to grow up, myself included, much quicker than a normal child should have to. And they weren't able to depend on anyone. And it's not to say that there wasn't a present mother and father, because a lot of the high performers, and women included, that I work with would say, I'm so blessed for my family life, and I'm so thankful for the upbringing that I had because I had parents that loved me. That's one of the most common things I hear in many of the people that have the most trauma. To be honest with you, right? It's this over optimism about what they're experiencing, what they're going through, because they feel like they can conquer anything and make it through anything. So it starts from a place of having to depend on yourself, or feeling like you couldn't depend on your mother to be able to take care of you. And that doesn't mean that your mother didn't do as good as she possibly could have in the situation, but most of the time, our mothers were not in a position to be able to emotionally take care of a child because they weren't in an emotional position to take care of themselves. And many people listening might say, oh, okay, well, not my mom or not my dad. But just because people are present doesn't mean they're emotionally present. And emotional disconnect is what causes a child to then have to take it into their own hands, because it senses the parents aren't in an emotionally stable place to take care of them, right? And children are hypersensitive to that. That's why it doesn't matter what you say to a kid. In the end, the kid is going to do whatever it is that you do, regardless of what you say to the child, right? And so if you're emotionally in a position where you're not present with that child, that's what the child is going to learn how to be. Right? It's going to learn to be emotionally distant, learn that it has to rely only on itself, right? And there's a huge problem with never being able to go through that dependent phase of life where you're meant to depend on your mother emotionally to take care of you, because then it causes you to have to kick into this hyper independent state much sooner than you are programmed to do. And eventually that's going to cause you, and I think actually tying back into my quote at the beginning, not being able to live a life that you want to live, it causes you to have to live a certain way based off an expectation you have of yourself, never giving yourself permission to maybe live a different way, or a way that contradicts maybe your religion or your upbringing or whatever it is at the time that you thought was best for the way of being you thought was best to be. And that causes you to eventually start to develop resentment for your way of being. And that's where some of these like later life crises, midlife crises happen and kick in, because a lot of high performers, they took on so much responsibility so soon. They've always lived under that place of having to fulfill a certain level of expectation because of themselves, that they end up rebelling against whatever it was that caused them to have to be, that caused them not to be independent. And they eventually they say, oh, wow, like this relationship that I'm in, this job that I'm at, like, no, this is terrible. It's causing me not to feel good about myself. But in reality, it all stemmed and started because they were unable to depend on their mother for emotional stability, causing them to have issues later on down the road.
I'm so glad you went there, because a lot of people want like, well, what is the solution? But I think in order to provide a solution for people and like support and help and direction and what should we do, like the how-tos, is we really need to understand like the underlying situation. And I think you're spot on in regards to the high performer is usually comes from an environment where they had to assume a higher level of responsibility. You and I were talking before, and I was describing some of my situation, and I experienced a lot of trauma, and I saw my mother be this, from how I could perceive her, as this a wounded woman who couldn't support herself and was kind of at the mercy of my father, who didn't take care of us and abused us and was an alcoholic and all that. And so for me, that was, I need to be, subconsciously, of course, I need to be an independent woman. I need to be successful. I need to make money. That was my wounded little Mars response of how to protect myself, but I didn't know it on a conscious level. I just thought I was going out and trying to do good in this world. And that was my like protection. Like that's how I protected myself from the outside world. And so I think as high performers, we really need to take a moment and reflect on our childhoods and see how that has impacted us. And you and I were also talking about, sometimes people say that they've got a great relationship with their parents, but there's a unhealthy layer to that. There's like a codependency, like you were perhaps playing a more significant role with your parent than you should have been. So I'm really glad that you went there in regards of, we need to examine that inner child work, and we need to know what happened in our childhood, because everything that we think is happening in our current life is actually just a symptom of a root cause that was happening in our childhood. So
yes. Absolutely. Beautifully said. For me, the longest time I was in the position where, no, I had a great childhood. Like my mom and dad love each other, and they do a lot. My mom was around. She was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was off doing his thing, starting a business. But what I didn't know was that when I was in the womb, my mom experienced the person that was closest to her, her grandma, dying of cancer, her mom having near life-threatening stroke. My dad was gone for work, so she was alone. She experienced all of this in the 9 months that I was in the womb. And she even got to a place, she told me, where she got on her knees and said, God, why'd you put a baby in me? You know I can't handle this right now. Right? And so it wasn't like she had all this other crap, but she assumed all of this emotional baggage during that time that I was feeling all of it. And I even had my brother came right after me 1 year and 8 months after, but then my dad ended up getting cancer right after my brother was born. So then I assumed an even greater role within being an emotional stability point for my mom during that time. And that's where, for me, at a very young age, I had to learn to be hypersensitive to how my mom was and her emotional state, because I had the perception that if she was in a position where she couldn't take care of me because of something I did, then I wouldn't be able to be taken care of. So I became a good little boy. I always followed the rules. I always made sure that I was doing everything I needed to do to make sure everybody was okay around me, right? I was controlling all that, facilitating all that. So I thought I could, but eventually got to a place where I realized there was something wrong. And in college, I was starting at a Division I football program, the end of my true freshman year. So I was feeling good about myself. I was in a position where I'm like, okay, well, I can attract girls I want to attract. I was doing well in school, had a lot of great friends. My family was close to me. And I was like, I still have this void. I built this awesome life around me, but I still have this void. What is this? And it seems to be one of the most biggest commonalities too. And a lot of the high performers is they hit that point where it's like, I have everything, but yet there's still that lack inside of me. What is this? Right? And so you talked about what is the process like for people to begin to get over that. Well, I talked about understanding where it comes from initially. But the reason why that's so important is because I believe the reason why most people aren't able to get over some of the issues they have as far as the lack within themselves that they experience is their inability to separate that way of being from themselves. And like I said, they just say, oh, well, I'm somebody that's just stressed. I'm somebody that's always going all the time. I'm somebody that just is really good at suppressing my emotions and not showing people how I really feel. But that's not the case. It's simply an adaptation as a result of your upbringing, right? It's an adaptation to survive at some point in your upbringing. So being able to get people to realize, say, hey, like based off what happened in your youth, it's not you that's having the problem. It's you and how you have this attachment on top of you that's latched onto you that's causing you to feel these insecurities in yourself. It's not just you, because what ends up happening is our brain can't figure out why we're experiencing the lack that we're experiencing in ourselves. So it just identifies with that way of being, which is the problem with the majority of the psychology industry and the counseling industry, is that we label people these certain things. And when you smack a label on yourself or you tell yourself this is just how you are, you're then incapable of being able to move past it. So that's why that's one of the first steps that I do with everybody that I work with is we understand why they are the way they are. So they're able to say, holy shit, like I'm not just effed up. Like that I'm not just like a sad person. I'm not just a mad person. Like this came from somewhere, right? And when you can identify the source of where it comes from, you can then begin the process of understanding, okay, this is me, right? I have my fist up and this is this attachment on top of me, right? We're not intertwined and twisted as one, but this is separate from me, right? Once you can come to terms with the fact that that way of being is separate from you, you can then begin the process of being able to healthfully move on from it.
Yeah, I loved everything that you said. And getting people to that process of admitting that their childhood wasn't perfect, I feel sometimes that's a struggle in itself, which is why I love these conversations where people like you and I can have an honest and raw conversation where we can say, this was my pain, this is what I went through, this is how I overcame it. Because especially with social media and stuff, you see a lot of really positive things, you see a lot of people being successful, but you don't get to see the backstory of. And I feel like we need to make the conversation of, oh, I experienced trauma, this was my trauma. It needs to be a more casual conversation. It needs to be more mainstream, because there's not anyone on this planet that didn't experience trauma from which they created some kind of trauma response, from which they created their identity from. It's exactly how you said it. The way you took it through that was 1,000% accurate. And yet people who are going through this unlearning, first like discovery of where the trauma came from and then the unlearning, they kind of feel like they're doing it on their own, and you kind of feel like you're venturing through this like wilderness on your own. And I want people to know that it's a part of life and everybody's gone through it. Everybody has gone through the trauma and not everybody will heal. But to the level that you're willing to do your healing is going to dictate the true amount of fulfillment that you have in your life. And I really loved how you took us through that journey, because I think that it's so true. We need to just first get it out there. Let's be honest about what happened. And also, a lot of us have like an underlying shame to it. Like my story for a while, the fact that I like did drugs and all these other things, I tried to keep it a secret for a while. And for as long as something is a secret, there's shame. But when you share that with someone who can show you empathy and compassion, you transcend that shame. And I think shame for a lot of us is what's holding us back. So yeah, we need to have these conversations and get this information out there and let people know that you're not alone and that there's avenues for you to reach out if you don't feel like you have a supportive network and friends and family. Keyen specializes in this type of work. I do this type of work. There's people out there who genuinely can and want to help. So love that.
Yes. You just had so many beautiful golden nuggets right there. Thank you for giving yourself that permission just to roll with that, because you just killed it.
I feel like I'm getting that juice from you. You know, when you just like you're feeding on the energy of like everything you were saying, I was like, yes, amen, amen, amen to everything you were saying. And yeah, I'm just so glad, you know, I'm really grateful that we connected and that we've been having this conversation, because it's an important one to have. It's so important. So yeah, that was cool.
Definitely. Well, thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And to play off what you said, the part where you said, there needs to be more casual conversation surrounding traumas. And like you said, shame is the thing that prevents a lot of us from being able to open up and express some of these things. That's why I try to do a good job. I mean, I shouldn't say try, but like just things like a lot of the times what ends up happening is a lot of young people that don't have a mother who's in a stable position emotionally, men in particular, end up becoming and actually take on a role of being their mother's husband. And actually happens as far as emotionally, and just being able to talk about that and just be like, yo, like, yeah, I was partially my mother's husband. Like, you know, like actually took on that role, like me personally, right, as a young child. And it wasn't my choice. I didn't have the choice to do that, right? And so there's not really any shame. It's kind of weird when you think about it. It's like, oh, like my mother's husband. Oh, what? But it just is what it is, right? There's no like, you had no choice. That's what I want people to realize, like, you didn't have the choice. And most of the people that will be explaining their situation, they take radical accountability for everything in their life. And the problem with that is that if you're taking accountability for a way of being that developed when you were between the ages of 0 and 7, you are dead wrong, because you did not have the capability of choosing which way of believing that you want to believe, right? And so in order for you to be able to move on, you have to be able to accept the fact that you were not capable of deciding and choosing your current belief system of constantly sacrificing your own emotions for everybody else. So I know it sounds all noble and high and mighty to take responsibility for everything in your life. But first thing you're going to have to do is not take responsibility for what you learned throughout the years of your earlier childhood, because that's truly one of the first steps in being able to heal, is realizing that, hey, there was nothing that I could have done. And when many of the people that I work with come to that realization, normally a massive emotional response happens with it. I can say firsthand for me, that was the case with me. When I first had the conversation with my mom about her telling me about what happened when I was in the womb, I broke into tears. I'm like, holy shit, like, wow, like I'm just not effed up. Like it came from somewhere, right? It came from somewhere. And it wasn't my choice. It wasn't something that I could control. Mm-hmm. Right? I couldn't, in my mother's womb, control what happened in the external world. I couldn't do that. I didn't have that ability, right? So it was such a beautiful moment of grace for myself and many of my clients included when they're able to come to terms with the fact that, hey, like I didn't have the choice to be my mother's husband. I didn't have the choice to be in a position where I defend for myself emotionally, right? Because we don't have that choice. Yeah. Right? I know it's difficult for the radical accountability, high-performing people to come to terms with that.
Absolutely. And you were saying that, you know, when you're really young, up to the age of 7, and also the things that happened when your mom was pregnant with you, like 100%. So there's the intergenerational trauma of like you the impact, your mom carries the trauma of her mother and then passes it down to you, plus all the environmental things that was happening to her when she was pregnant with you. So there's layers to this, because I think some people are like, well, I can't consciously remember a time where I was traumatized, or I can't consciously remember. Well, you can't consciously remember a lot of the trauma that happened when you were young, but your emotional body remembers. You store it in your body regardless of whether you can remember it on a cognitive level. And I love that you said that we didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice, even if you thought you were making a choice as a child, because we are so programmable at that age that even the things we don't want to be like our parents, we sometimes embody those things and we act like our parents even when we don't want to, because it was ingrained, it was conditioned in us, that way of thinking, that way of being. So if you don't become aware of those things, you think it's who you are. And so, yeah, I really liked what you said too, like, not owning that part, not taking responsibility for everything, being able to critically look at your life situation and be like, oh, okay, there's a chunk of that I can't own. There's stuff like later I can own, but let's be reasonable about what you're taking responsibility for. Because it's just, yeah, it's so disempowering to feel like everything's your fault. And as children, we're egocentric at that time. So we think that when our mom is mean to us, we think it's because we're not lovable, or it's a reflection of how she feels about us, not because she had a hard day at work, not because her husband was really rude to her or whatever it is. We own that and we think it's our fault, and we need to, work to let some of that go for sure.
Absolutely. That was once again beautifully said.
I feel like we're just jamming. So let's talk about our women again. Because let's say, like, now I have owned my past and I can recognize the stuff that maybe wasn't mine, and I want to start to shift that. Like, where am I going from here in terms of not getting caught in that cycle of being overly in my masculine to try to survive in this man's world?
Well, so much of it, at least for the process that I will take women through, it's giving yourself the permission to be able to trust somebody else. Because there's this huge wall up that's like, oh, I can't trust anybody else but myself, so I have to make everything happen all alone, all by myself. And so breaking down some of those walls, it normally takes maybe 2 or 3 sessions, but giving them the space and the permission to be able to open up and say, hey, like, this is how I'm feeling, without me having to like pry and poke and like have to like use different like techniques and tactics to try to get them to a place to open up. So that's probably the biggest battle, is getting them to a place to realize, hey, like, this is a safe space for you to be able to depend on me to be able to handle your emotions. So I think that's where actually a lot of the healing comes from with a lot of people that I work with, is me being able to actually healthfully hold the space for them to be able to depend on me temporarily, for them to be able to come back and then be massively, truly independent, not from a place of lack, but from a place of wholeness within themselves. So it's being able to find someone that you can truly confide in. And what I see with a lot of women, if you don't, somebody listens like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I don't need that. I don't need somebody to trust in. Well, yes, you do, because otherwise your relationships are going to massively crumble underneath you with your significant other. Because what will happen is you'll either end up taking an extremely masculine role in the relationship where you become the man essentially, which I know society tells you that you need to have that role and that you should have that role. But I can promise you, when you have all the control, you'll either lose attraction for your man, or you'll realize, this is not what I want. I really don't want all this. End up getting to a position where you get so stressed out that you self-sabotage the relationship. Right? Not to say that women aren't very powerful in the context of a relationship, but when you take on that extremely masculine role of not being as emotionally open and closed, it causes your man to turn into a bitch, or you end up getting so stressed because you hold so much weight that you leave the relationship. And I think what happens a lot of the times too is what women do is they put so much pressure on themselves, right? These high performing positions put so much pressure on themselves to be the perfect wife, right? To be the perfect caretaker of their child, right? And so what ends up happening is they don't give themselves the permission to own their emotional side with their man. And what a man needs in the context of a relationship is an ability to be able to be like, yes, I am the rock in this relationship, and my woman can depend on me when she is not in a stable place. But if you never give a man the ability to do that, your man is not going to feel significant, causing him to then have insecurities in himself and maybe seek elsewhere or do things that he normally wouldn't do. Now, it's not to say that a man's not capable of taking accountability for himself, right? But that's what happens when you don't give yourself the permission to be able to open up healthfully in a relationship and give the man the permission to be the man, is that you end up being the man and it ends up being a thing that you don't really want. So if you never give yourself permission to open up somebody outside the context of an intimate relationship, you might take a lot of stuff in that relationship that might leading to an unhealthy ending to that relationship.
Yeah, I love that. And like, I agree. When I was in my place of being, I'm so self-sufficient, I don't need a man, it was my inability to trust that the man could actually take care of me. And that had to do with my wounding. I hadn't healed that stuff. So I was constantly in this self-preservation mode. And I think that the healing bit is so important to the trust bit. Like, we can't trust until we've healed that stuff in the past. But I would totally agree with that in terms of the relationship as well. Like, if you can't open up and trust in the relationship, and we're not talking trust like this guy won't cheat on me. It's like trust in the relationship that it's a good one. Trust that this guy is a good guy and he actually loves you. Like, that I find is one of the
that you're worthy of being loved.
Yes. And I find that is one of the biggest things with women, is the trusting the man is actually not as deep rooted as the trusting that he truly loves you, because the not trusting him for like cheating and all that kind of stuff, that comes from your worthiness, as you said, of worthy of being loved. Like, if I feel worthy to be loved and I feel like I trust this man to love me because of my worthiness, then I'm not going to automatically assume that he's out cheating. But I find a lot of women assume the cheating thing. But why? I think that's a direct reflection of the lack of worthiness. Do you see that too? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. 100%. And the interesting part is, like, you'll always attract somebody based off where you're at. And if you're in a position where you're not capable of trusting yourself because you don't give yourself permission to be open emotionally with how you really truly feel at times, you're going to attract somebody that's not in the capacity to be able to be trusted, right? So a lot of the times, like, your feelings of not being able to trust in the person that you're with have some truth to them because you attract that. So, right, so that's the importance of being able to work through some of these deeper inner-based traumas, because especially as a woman, you will attract the man in a place of where you're currently at. So there might actually be a lot of truth to your inability to trust that individual that you attract into your life at that time. But when you give yourself that permission to do the work outside of the relationship, you end up attracting somebody that meets you in a position where they are capable of being trusted. And that's when it's up to you to be able to then give yourself permission to be able to open up and allow that man to lead in the relationship.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, because that's something that in the past I've struggled with, is letting the man lead. And I know that I've worked with women who are very openly told me that it's hard for them to give that guy the space. First of all, you touched on it already, but why is it so important that we have those separate roles of the man being able to lead? Like, why is that not a sexist conversation, and why that's really important to like healthy relationship dynamics?
That's a phenomenal question. There's so many different avenues that we can go with that. But to start with, I just want to say, like, I truly believe, just based off, like, if you look down and you see something between your legs, that tells you something. And I think it's more than just a physical feature. Now, despite any of the jargon, the conversations about what people are, whatever they're not, all right, I'm just going to assume the position that if you have something between your legs, that is what you represent at your essence. All right. So if you did have something hanging down between your legs, you are a masculine. And you are created to embody the masculine role in a relationship. And if you don't have something between your legs, you were created to embody the true feminine role in a relationship. And I think the biggest thing with women that they don't want to accept into that role, because they believe that, well, if I accept that role, then that means I'll be a housewife where I don't do anything with my life, right? So there's that belief system that's like, oh, if I embody my true femininity and give myself that permission to allow the man to lead, well, that will mean that I have to give up my career, and that will mean that I have to give up these dreams and aspirations, and I'll have to just be at home and cook and clean, right? But that's not what embodying the true feminine is. Like, it's not what it is at all. It's actually way more beneficial, because I think when women find they realize they give themselves that permission to trust the man in the relationship with their emotions in many ways, it feels really good. It feels comfortable, and it actually gives them the permission to be able to be the flowy beings that the feminine energy at its essence is. And actually, you're doing yourself a massive disservice if you're keeping yourself in that masculine role, because the true feminine is phenomenal at being able to manifest at will, right? And if you're trying to control everything and you don't give the man the permission to be able to create some stability in your life, then it ruins your ability to be able to truly manifest and really bring things in at will. So you actually end up losing because you feel like you have to maintain control in the relationship. And just because you give the man the permission to lead, I know that's like broad and it's kind of mental masturbation because we're not diving too deep into it, and we can dive deeper into what that means, right? But you're actually cutting yourself short. And you also need to realize, I hate using that because there's a reason why you can't realize it, but the realization is that you're not just going to end up a housewife that's unhappy and your husband's out living it up. That's just not the case, just based off your nature as is, because you've already embodied so much of your masculinity that simply won't happen. And if it does, it'll be something that feels really good to you because you're like, yes, you're motivated and inspired to do it because it feels good. But based off your nature, because of the way that you've been the majority of your life, that won't happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And you're right. It's like we sometimes perceive, like if I'm too much in my feminine, then he's going to expect me to not have a career and stay at home and all that. And that's like, those are outdated gender roles. Like when we're talking feminine, masculine energy, it's like our way of being. And again, that's a really not clear way of explaining it, but it's like the energy that we embody in the relationship. So we can still have control and autonomy in our business world, but it's being able to shift that to be in our feminine in our relationship. And so for me, I'll just use myself as an example because it's hard for me to explain. It's a hard thing to explain, like how you embody feminine energy, but
I can explain too when you're done explaining too. So I want to hear what you have to say, and then I will.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So for me, I'll make it quick because I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So for me, I was always in that wounded place where I didn't want to let guys in. So I was always standoffish. And so I wanted to appear strong and like I did everything perfect, but there was a coldness about it it wasn't a warmth and the nurturing of the feminine that where he felt safe to come around. And so there was always a disconnect because you're talking about polarity. It's like opposites attract. And when you were being in your masculine, then he can't truly be in his masculine. And if he is in his masculine, then you guys like literally repel each other. And that's what I found in my relationships. Like it would get to a point where we weren't even attracted to each other anymore. And I have to own my role in that, of where I didn't let him lead, or I had to win a conversation for no reason except that I wanted to win, which is just really, it's a wounded response. And so with Dan, I really wanted to be different in it. And so in the beginning of our relationship, he called me out a few times when I was being like that. And I shifted because I didn't want to be that person in the relationship. And it's something that I work on still, to be more vulnerable and to open up to him so he can come and a feminist, it's going to sound awful, but for him to save me in a way, but like where I can fall into him and be like, oh, I'm having such a bad day, or like vulnerable, and he can pick me up. And I would have never done that in past relationships. So that's just my example. Like I didn't know how to explain it, so I thought I would just share that.
That's amazing. I love the final example that you just gave, because like you doing that, it's not you being weak. It's actually you massively gaining, because you're giving him the ability to be in a position to embody his masculinity of like, yes, I am the rock. This feels so good. Yes, it's okay, baby. Come here. I will take care of you. Yeah. Right. It feels good to us. Right. We like to be in that role. Right. And you also like to be in the role where the man feels that way because it makes you feel safe, protected. So everybody wins. Right. So it's not like one's being weak or one's not. Like everybody wins. So I think that's beautiful. We're talking about the masculine and the feminine and how to be able, like, what the traits that are masculine, traits that are feminine. And so people might be wondering, okay, like that's great. Like it's awesome to hear, but like, how do I naturally begin to embody these things? And this is what I would say to that. I said a couple of the steps already, but what I've found is that when you do the internal work to be able to unlearn who you're not, you actually naturally begin to embody your divine way of being. Okay, so the men end up stepping into their true masculinity, not the fake alpha shit. They actually start to step into their true masculinity, and the women start to step into their true femininity. And it's really funny because I can give an example. Even today, I was on a conversation with one of my female clients, and one of her biggest things was working through the ability of just like accepting her body and her femininity as being something that was beautiful. And we spent the first couple of weeks just really diving into like, because she was embodied a lot of masculine traits and diving into her masculinity and why she was the way she was and how she got to that place. And she came to me in our conversation today and she's like, Keyen, she's like, I went out and my sister asked me to go shopping and I was just like, yeah. And it felt really good. And normally I always just go to secondhand stores to get clothes because I'm always very good at budgeting and I'm always really good at saving and, you know, all this like masculine energy type stuff. And she's like, but I just like gave myself permission to just do some retail therapy. And oh my gosh, that felt amazing. And I'm like, we never even talked about that, did we? She's like, no, how? I'm like, well, I'm glad you asked, right? Because we're doing the internal work to unlearn who you're not. And when you do that work, you naturally begin to embody those ways of being. And so what I don't want to happen is I don't want people to just listen and be like, oh, well, okay, well, what is femininity? Oh, okay, well, let me just try to embody that. Right? It doesn't really work that way, right? Because if you're trying, that's going to lead to issues. Now, it's good to have the understanding of what it is so you can recognize it when it shows up. But ultimately, it's the internal work that it takes, changing within, so then you reflect externally in your highest divine version, if you're male, the masculine, and the female, the true feminine.
I love that because even my head was going there. So I loved how you pivoted that and you redirected that because even my head goes to, okay, so how do you embody the feminine? But what you're saying is that it's not about trying to embody the feminine. You are feminine, ladies. You were born with that feminine essence. So when you do the healing work of unlearning all the BS that you picked up along the way, it will naturally emerge and it will feel good. And you'll know you're on the path because it feels good. Like your client was like, how did this even happen? We didn't discuss this. It just emerged naturally. Love it. Yeah. That is so awesome. Yeah. Cause I see a lot of conversation about even from men. I actually got into a little bit of and I normally don't go back and forth on comments, but someone posted something about feminist women attract and some derogatory or I don't know, pussy, emasculated men, something like that. And I thought that was quite misguided. And it got into this huge thing about feminine and masculine energy and that men are the strong leader and they need to And I think when you get into that conversation, it starts to trigger in women this thing of if you don't understand it, it sounds like you're saying that the woman is inferior, but it's not about that. It's about balancing those energies in a way that works for you to find harmony within your relationships. And I really want to get this clear as well, because when we say, let the man lead, I think some women, because I've experienced this, are like, yeah, but that's letting him take over and he's the boss of me. And I really would like to dismantle that. And that's not what we're talking about. I think it's again, I think that's a wounded response to be fearful of this man is going to be in control of me. And that comes down to what you were discussing before, is that level of trust, that trust in this man, because at the end of the day, men typically are stronger and more powerful in their physical presence, yet we trust to be around them. It's part of that. It's honoring that there's a non-physical element to the man being that physically stronger one in the physical. There's an energetic element to that as well. And it's okay as women to feel safe and to let the man lead. And that letting the man lead doesn't mean that you're taking a back seat. It's just honoring our differences. And that's why I think conversations like this are important too. Because me, even 2 years ago, Keyen, I would have not entertained that notion, because I was still, even though tons of personal development, tons of business background, I still would have been on guard of some of the stuff we're talking about now. But I can tell you from experience, how important this work is and how it's so much transformed my personal life in doing some of this stuff.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. I think a lot of people out there needed to hear that too. And I think also women, may need to realize when we're talking about this is like, you actually are taking an even greater driver's role or front seat role when you give yourself that permission, because you feel 10 times better. And you can actually like I hate to say this, giving out our secrets, but like you can actually like control a man in a way that he wants to be controlled. Like you can get out of a relationship exactly what you want with being able to embody your divine way of being. Like you can, like we as men want to, like we want to be controlled by a woman that is in her divine energy. I was like, baby, oh, like, can you do this? Absolutely, baby, I'll do that for you. But if you try to just like have it all together all the time and don't give him the permission to be there for you in a sense emotionally, then like you're just screwing yourself over. Like we want to be, that feels good to me when I am in that role, when I can do that. And I end up wanting to do way more for her when she gives me the permission to do that in my own relationship, right? Because it feels good, right? And then we all win. So that's the big part about it, is you're actually winning when you give yourself that permission to do that. And I know it might contradict because of what society says and all this stuff going on and the weakening of the masculine society, and we can go about all that. And honestly, with a lot of women out there, I can't blame you for not wanting to trust your man, because it's a bunch of pussies right now. Like men are, like we are not embodying our masculine as a society and as a world right now, because we're being suppressed, or say we're being told our masculinity is toxic. Our masculinity is not good, which is leading women to not be able to trust even more. So I can't blame a lot of the women out there that aren't trusting, because a lot of the men are embodying much more feminine ways of being, which causes a woman not to be able to trust. And women have that sixth sense. Women can always tell. They always know where a man's really at. Even though if they might not mentally be able to understand it, they know. They know. And it's actually frustrating sometimes because they know. I wish I could fake it, right? But I can't, because she always knows.
It's so true. Oh my God, it's so funny. Yeah, I totally agree. And you know what, Keyen, I would love to have you back to discuss specifically masculinity, right? And like how, you know, like all those elements as well, because I think that it's so important. And I love that you said that it truly is a win-win. And you're discussing how when your girlfriend asks you in like a really soft and beautiful way, and a way of like, I kind of need you to support me, it's really amazing for you to come in and be that strong. So she feels protected. You feel like you are the protector. So, and then there's women who won't ask at all, or ask from a wounded way, right? And they say, but my husband or my boyfriend doesn't want to do anything for me. And it's kind of like, well, how did you ask? What was the energy in which you came to him to, like, oh, you didn't take out the like garbage again? Oh, the dishes are still here. You know, like things like men are like, and this is not at all to degrade men, but they're like adorable little puppies. Like they love to be praised. And I find with Dan, like the more I praise him, he's like a little puppy that just wants to do more. It's so beautiful. But like the moment, like if I use a different tone on him, I can see immediately on his face the impact that I've made. And one, I never want to hurt him because I love him too much, and I just don't want to be that person. But it's like it changed again. It like that little thing has changed the whole dynamic of their relationship. So it's about how we're asking ladies, if we're coming from a place of love and positive expectation that our partner can support us and can do this thing for us, and asking from a place of love. And then when they do it, being so grateful for them opening their heart and them not being scared to be whipped and like, oh, like he does everything. You know what I mean? Because he's gone and done something for you, then we should be grateful for that too.
Yes, I love that you said that. And I did not take it degrading in any way, shape, or form, because it does feel good. It's like, let me be the puppy, damn it. Like I don't want to feel like I'm with a man. Like, and that's what happens when your husband, right, when he doesn't respond well, he feels like he's being threatened like a man, because you are being a man, right? And so when a man feels like his wife or his significant other is stepping into being a man, essentially, he's going to feel threatened, and not with either the fight or flight response kicks in, right? So you're not doing anybody a favor by you being in that position. We want to be the puppy.
Yeah, 1,000%. And when your man is on that fight or flight, like I'm being attacked, then he's going to confirm your whole fear of I'm not safe. And so it's a vicious cycle. So
come on.
I absolutely love this conversation. Like, I cannot tell you, Keyen, please let's book in our next call really soon, because I feel like them being back to back would be awesome. And I'm so glad I had this conversation with you, because I say a lot of this stuff to my female clients, but I feel like coming from a guy who understands this space, you know, coming from a masculine male saying this, I think it's going to strike a chord in a different way. So I'm really grateful for that.
Absolutely. This conversation has been absolutely amazing. And two, I would love to come on again and share my experience, because I haven't always been able to. I'm still working on being able to embody my masculinity, but I have not always been in that position. I know a lot of guys are in that position as well. So I'd love to come on and share my story of being able to step more into that place as well.
Oh, I love it. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to ask you as a last question, a really loaded question. So do with it what you please. But what do you want your legacy to be?
What feels good to me, and this is how I'm living my life right now, is being in a position where I'm not seeking any sort of massive worldly acceptance. And what I do is, I'm not a massive social media presence. I'm not all over creating a bunch of content, but the people that I'm working with, I am pouring into. And I'm kind of the guy that's behind the scenes working with the people that's influencing everybody else. And so what I'd like to do is to be able to influence as many influential people as I can by helping them heal themselves so they can help heal the masses. And I really at this point don't have any massive desire to be in the spotlight, but I'd like my legacy to be one of, like nobody really knows who that guy was, but he just did all of this stuff. And he did all these for this many people and worked with this person and that person. And he just lived his life, right? And I just live my life, right? And that's how I go about my practice right now. I pour into people that I'm working with, and I live my life. My life isn't to serve at the highest level possible. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to step into me at the highest level possible, not to make it about everybody else, but make it about myself. And as I continue to make it about myself and doing what feels good to me, I'll then, as a response, create change at a level that I'm not sure, but I think is going to be pretty high. But my goal isn't to always be in the spotlight, but my legacy is to be the guy behind the scenes that people later on are like, hey, who was that guy that was impacting this person and like who helped heal this person and this person? Oh, wow, like this dude, like what? Like that guy? And that feels good. I can just live my life and not live overly in the public eye, which if I'm placed in that position, I'll be okay with. But I don't have that desire, and I'll be the guy behind the scenes. I enjoy that.
Okay, guys, I hope you got some powerful takeaways from this episode. If so, please share it with someone. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe and review, as it helps us to spread our message of inspiration. Sending you so much love, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Hustler's Guide to Flow.